Splatoon 3 has had a handful of metas, whether it was the beginning of the game with Crab Tank meta, its peak with Inkjet meta, or the long and arduous Trizuka meta. The game has had an interesting way of developing for competitive players who compete in tournaments. Now that we are at the 2-year mark of Splatoon 3, it has me wondering, what would be a perfect meta for this game? Interestingly enough, Chara shared a tier list on what a perfect meta would be for him. So I decided to invite him on my channel and have a conversation about his thought process on his tier list. I do want to note that this discussion did happen before the release of version 9.0's patch notes for Splatoon 3. Even though some weapon changes did happen in that update, the conversation still provides an in-depth understanding of what weapons are better for competitive play and why, the complexity of weapon balances, and Chara's philosophy of comp building. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to both of our channels. If you enjoyed this video, you'd probably enjoy the video about 1 tricks in a competitive setting, or what specials should return to Splatoon 4. If you'd like to check them out, make sure to check out my competitive Splatoon topics playlist on my channel. With that out of the way, enjoy the video. Well, everyone, thank you so much for coming to the channel, and Chara, thank you so much for coming to the channel too. There's been a lot of discussions about like what is a good meta or perfect meta on quote on set. So I'm really glad to have you on, because considering you posted this tier list a few days ago.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of just threw this together as like, I don't have as much to do, and this is a common question I get, and it got me thinking a little bit like, okay, if I could actually just, you know, because I don't know how the hell you would get here, but if we just close my eyes and pretend whatever I rank will be how it'll be, what stuff would I actually want to see most often? And like, I guess, I don't know, whenever I post a list like Blue Sky or anything, it's never perfect. I'm just throwing it together for a post. I'm not going to put as much thought as to like a list that goes in an actual video. But
okay, cool.
Here we are in an actual video.
Yeah. So I do want to give a couple disclaimers for our viewers out there, and Chara, add on if you'd like. This is strictly competitive play. Basically, this is in a tournament context, so this is how we would want to, or Chara would want to see the tier list apply in a tournament setting. And at the end of the day, this is just your opinion, right, Chara? And you added on that you just threw this together.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So
this list took 30 minutes to make. Don't get too offended by it.
All right. Let's get started with the first tier. So we'll go from bottom up. For a generalized way of looking at it, Chara, how would you define this tier list?
Basically, I'm trying to rank like what I think would be most interesting or most common to see to least common. So the higher up on the list, the more common a weapon should be to me. And then the further down we go, the less and less I want to see of the weapon. And this is the only tier where like I just don't want to see it. I don't think. And there's usually 3 reasons for why weapons would be on this list. There is spam playstyles, where you kind of just sit back. So like if you remember Flings at the beginning of the game, getting like 7 missiles a match, or GooTuber doing the same thing. It could be paint spam specifically for things like Blob, or Jet Sculpture, which kind of just, they don't have kits that incentivize moving forward at all. So they kind of just sit back and throw pain and damage at you. And then the other one kind of falls into this category, like Junior, for instance. But it could also be weapons like Neo-Solution Era, where I believe the way the weapons are designed are not meant for competitive play. And for the record, that's okay. I think if this was a list about weapons that are really good for people going up to level 10, Junior would be at the top of the list. Perfect. If you're a beginner at the game, the ink efficiency is so good you don't got to worry about it. You got the easier bomb use, so again, you don't have to think about it. The spread helps to make sure people are painting or hitting their shots properly. You got a really simple kit, blah, 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 blah. You know, great weapon for people getting into the game, and that's fine. That's what Junior should be. The priority for Junior should be having a weapon that allows people to easily get into the game. It's the first weapon you unlock, and that's something that has to be done very well. Junior is not designed to be a competitive weapon, which is why I get a little
Okay.
Like, I see the devs try to give buffs to this weapon. Like, I think there's one that's like a 6% strafe speed buff. It's like, why? This is strictly for the top 0.001% of players, because nobody else is going to care about a 6% strafe speed buff. They're not going to notice it. You will never tell that it's even there. So, Junior, at a top level of play, all these attributes that we gave to the weapon that are really good for it, at lower level play, aren't good here. Now you have a weapon that is going to be spamming double bomb, that's going to get a billion bubbles, that's going to paint the whole time, and it's because of all the attributes we gave it to work when you're level 10 or lower, and it's like you can't take that away without also hurting that level of play. So this is a weapon that's very clearly not built for competitive play, and so I don't think it should see much use in competitive play. That's my opinion.
So it sounds like basically these are weapons that kind of do the bare minimum in a competitive context in a tournament around team play, but they annoy the heck out of people because they're particularly doing just one thing, which is paint or special output. I mean, those two things go hand in hand because you paint to get your specials. So like Junior, you were saying, is just chucking bombs left and right, popping bubble, painting, chucking bombs, popping bubble, and rinse and repeat.
Yeah, and it's also like a balance thing a little bit, to where, Junior right now is like a kind of high tier weapon. It's kind of all right, all things considered. And that means, luckily with the spot it's in right now, Junior players kind of have to try to fight a little bit to make it work. But if you had Junior balanced to like the very best of weapons, it wouldn't have to do that. So you can't make it that good. And that's also why you probably notice there's one weapon on this list that doesn't fit anything.
Right, I was just about to bring that up. Go ahead.
Which is Clash Blaster. And you might be like, okay, this thing doesn't paint spam. Why is this here? Okay, Clash Blaster is like a bottom tier terrible weapon. Like it's fun. I like playing it, but it's horrible. It is so bad. If you were to like take Clash and make it this top tier monster, what would you have to do to the weapon, and what would that do to the game? Because in my head, I think like, okay, this thing has to have an even bigger blast radius, or maybe a faster fire rate or something like that. It's like, I don't think we want that. And then B rank gets demolished. B rank is 4 Clash Blasters every game. So it's like, okay, you just can't. We kind of put ourselves in a corner. You could rework the weapon, of course, but I didn't count reworks on this list because at that point, if you're changing enough about a weapon to make it a complete rework, like lowering Clash's blast radius, for instance, that's a different weapon. That's outside of the scope of this video for me.
Right. And for everybody that's listening, breaking news, yes, Clash Blaster is not top tier, regardless of what you see in your, I guess, Anarchy or X-Rank series. So
I'm curious if people still complain about it. I haven't seen as many Clash complaints as I did in my Splatoon 2 days, but I might might not be seeing it. Maybe you get some stuff.
I see some stuff because I sometimes post shorts on YouTube, and there goes the random comment saying like, Clash Blaster is OP, but it's like, no, all you need to do is
shorts?
Yeah, on YouTube shorts. I think those type of style videos, like TikTok style videos, kind of attract a different audience. So
I have like an 8K Clash Blaster clip I got at the very start of the game.
Should probably post it.
I got it. If I find it, it'll appear on the YouTube shorts.
All right. So this is generally the class that strictly focuses on just one element that tends to be a little bit annoying and doesn't contribute as much to competitive team play. Okay. Moving to the niche only, how would you define this particular category?
Okay. A lot of these are weapons that I would like to be higher, but something has happened along the way to where I cannot see them getting higher, and a few of them are here because they physically can't. So this list has like a little bit
there's a bit of a mix, right?
Yeah. So some of these are due, or the majority I would say, are due to the weapon kit either being, it has pieces that if you balanced it to work properly, it would overtune it, or the playstyle of the kit provides a weapon would be bad. So like vanilla L3, for example. I think L3 is a fine weapon. I like it. L3D is much higher. But this L3 is a crab spammer. So it's stuck down here. It's still like a crab. It's not the worst thing to spam. So like if it's played on like crab leg, for instance, or something that's a very crab favored map, okay, that's fine. But would I want to see it in every game? Probably not.
So I'm curious. So like, how would you differentiate L3, because you're saying it's a spammer, right? And it paints well. How would, like, what if someone said, like, well, if you're saying that about L3, why not put it in the tier below? Like, what differentiates this weapon from, say, like a Bloblobber?
That's a good question. So there's a few attributes to it. A big one is the range value. The less range something has, the less it can spam, especially if it doesn't have a bomb, because bombs are what make up for the range disadvantage. And it has curling, which is kind of in the middle. It's kind of a bomb, but also kind of not really. So the range is one. Two is the special itself it's spamming. You might notice that Anarchy Nova is not down there, even though it's also a Nova.
Right.
The type of special you spam matters. If it's like Whale or Rain that you just throw and are kind of automatic or have global range, is different from a special that requires like, hey, you have to go be an Inkjet or a Crab, and there's a lot more complicated stuff that goes on with that. So, and the same thing as well as you can't farm another Crab until you're done being a Crab. So there's a bit more depth to that, and I'll probably get into that more when I talk about like the certain specials higher up. So that's a factor.
Okay.
And then the other one would just be, how much does the weapon fight, basically? And L3 still fights a little bit, especially since they buffed its damage in a recent patch. So you actually want to hit 30 damage, because a lot of things in this game that are good deal like 70 damage, and you want to combo with that.
So with this kind of narrative for L3, because I know someone might think this as well. So like the narrative for L3, that kind of applies to like Gold Arrow Spray, the Swigs, and I guess the Undercover Brella. Because they kind of have that, they paint a lot, they spam their specials, but you feel because of the special that they have and the kit and hole, they're a bit different, that differentiates the two categories.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. Like for instance, L3, and like again, it matters so much for the kit. If anyone remembers Splatoon 2's L3D kit with Burst Jet, that would be at the highest tier of this list.
Okay, I see what you mean.
So it's like, it's what toolkit you give a weapon matters a lot for how the weapon actually plays and where it's placed. There are other things though, like for example, Swig and Undercover both fall into the, if you buff this to be a top tier weapon, what are you gonna have to do? Especially Swig, because of like, especially for both of these weapons actually, because of the kits.
Right.
They don't have powerful kits, so you have to make the main weapon really good to be like this meta pick.
Right.
And that makes it harder, because like, what are you gonna do for Swig? Remember when its horizontal damage was like minimum 30, now it's minimum 40?
Yeah.
And what would it need to be good? Like minimum 45 maybe? And then make the maximum like 90? At some point, the numbers just get a little ridiculous.
Before I get into the, the top weapons up on the list of the shooters here, because those I think are the ones that probably pop out to people when they're looking at this list. Let's hit some very quick ones. So some people might be surprised that you're putting both bows and both hydras and both e-liters actually. So these all are long range weapons. Why would you say they should be a niche-only pick in a competitive play context?
All of these are kind of the same issue. It's kind of what I just talked about in terms of a balancing issue. These are very extreme weapons. Hydra's the slowest weapon in the game, and it has like 4 seconds of this super powerful spray that only really loses to like other chargers.
Right.
And then Leader has max range, and Bow has, the ability to be a sniper at like Splat Charger range, or I think it's Splat, it might be a little bit more, I don't quite remember, but also has AoE and object damage. So it's a lot of different things together to where it's very tricky to balance these weapons without that particular aspect feeling too overtuned. Bow is the one exception where like I could maybe see Bow working, especially because the Inkline kit is very good for the game. So I can maybe see the Bow being balanced in a way that works. But right now, that's kind of why I feel like the buffs to Bow have been, like, the devs have clearly been trying to make the weapon good, but they've also, like, done buffs that are a lot more careful, because, I mean, just think about what this weapon could be. Like, you could give it the reflux buff where its shots travel close together, or you could make the AoE bigger, but think about how scary those buffs are, especially if they're combined. Right? Imagine a bow that's, like, can snipe you as reliably as a Splat Charger, but also have AoE to hit you behind corners. It's a balancing nightmare. And I think Wellstring is a little bit different, which is why it's higher, and I'll kind of get to that later. But that's what I see with Tri-Stringer. But I think Inkline has a much better base kit. Like, it's a very healthy kit, so maybe they could make Bow work. I just don't see how they would right now. Maybe the devs will figure it out.
Okay.
Leader is screwed because it has the kit problem. So the gun should ideally never be buffed, but it needs to be because like the kits would have to be changed or buffed to some degree. So leader's kind of screwed to that. It's hard to buff it. And then Hydra just needs a complete rework because this weapon is either it's able to get a charge off and it's oppressive as hell, or you're fighting like bombs and missiles and displacement and charger, and you can't play the game as a Hydra player. Like you just can't do anything. And in ranks, that's not really as much of a thing, but in top level play, whenever Hydra is used, that's what happens. Like maybe it'll get a game on a comp that doesn't do well against it, and then you immediately counterpick it, and the Hydra player looks miserable for 5 minutes. So it's hard.
I think to give a picture to people that may not be aware of like how it looks like on a competitive setting, like I mean, even just watching like tourneys or like I could imagine a player picking Hydra going into a match with the top level team, and then they're just like shooting Zukas at it, and then Hydra's just like rushing around. Right.
With Hydra and Leader and Bo, if it was like really overtuned in the way I'm describing, you wouldn't interact with the other players. They would not peek you. You would just interact with bombs and getting shot by specials. And it's like the other players don't like doing that, but that's how you win against those weapons. And that's the problem. When the optimal playstyle to beat a weapon is unhealthy, that is a problem with the weapon creating that playstyle. Okay. So Leader bears responsibility for everyone having to sit behind a corner, for instance, which is why stuff like Cooler has kind of been nice. If Respawn Punisher didn't exist, I think Cooler and Leader with different kits would actually be okay, because Cooler kind of solves this problem of like, hey, you can pick the lead, you can like peek the leader, and if you die, it's not that big a deal. But without Cooler, it's like you peek leader, and not only do you die, you lose more of your special, and you don't have QR. So it's like, oh, okay, if we can't run down leader because it has an ability that prevents that from working, I'm just going to spam it with specials because that's the only option. Which is a brief summary into why Respawn Punisher is the worst ability they've ever added to the game.
Right.
Because it just makes it less fun for everyone involved whenever the ability is active on a charger.
Okay. So that's what you're highlighting with these weapons, is like they have the extremes where they can be exploited very, very easily once you reach a high and top level of competitive play. So that's why you would relegate them to like niche only. They're not as annoying as the bottom spammers, but tell me a little bit about Slosher and Dapples.
Vanilla Dapple is here mostly because of the kit. It's impossible to get in again without overtuning it. Yeah. Make this kit anything but a niche. Like you see it on some Rainmaker maps or like Flounder that are really good for beacons. And I guess what I want to note here is, for the record, there's not anything wrong with a weapon being a really niche pick. Sometimes that's okay. Like I think Vanilla Dapple does fit that, where like, hey, I think it's really cool that there's this short-range, cooler beacon option for something like Flounder Heights.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know another map for it. Honestly, Flounder just comes to mind. Some Rainmaker stages, maybe
like Marlin.
Maybe something like that.
Yeah.
And that's fine. It doesn't need to do anything more than that. That's why you have another kit that should be ideally balanced better. The problem is Dapple does not have that kit, but, you know.
I see.
Story of Dapple.
Okay.
So that's the case for all of these. You know, HUD is another kit where Wall and Bubble is just, if it was good on H3, this would just sit and be too tanky, so you can't, there's some kind of limit on it to me.
Right.
I guess that's how I label it. And then there's, of course, your fair share of fun weapons that are not built for comp play per usual, like Custom Goo is clearly not designed to take down a top team, but that's fine because it's really funny, and that's all it needs to be.
Right, so these are pretty much your weapon picks, like for maybe 1 or 2 stages, like you're saying. Dapples on Flounder. I could imagine someone picking like maybe like on Humpback would probably maybe Rainmaker, but then why not just pick Slosher? But that's right. So that's the interesting weapons that we've kind of covered at the bottom of this tier. But there are some other weapons that are a bit more unusual here. So let's first go to Shot, and I guess we'll include Splash Neo in there, given that it's risen in the meta recently, and then we'll finish it off with Squeezer.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about, I want to talk about shooters specifically here.
Okay, go for it.
Most shooters in the game, this doesn't apply to all of them, and why some shooters are niche. Generally shorter range ones. if you're looking at something, let's take a look at Splattershot versus Carbon. Both of these have kind of similar kits. You have Suction Zuka, Burst Zuka. But if you look at the kits and how much they revolve around their special, for Carbon, it has a Zuka, but Zuka is like a very small part of its game plan. It only gets a few of them a game. And like it's a good tool for the weapon specifically. It has a lot of synergy, but it's not central to it. Splattershot, on the other hand, is picked for the Zuka specifically.
I see. Okay.
Like Splash Neo is picked for the strikes. A lot of short-range shooters, and this goes for previous games, like in Splatoon 2, if you want a short-range shooter and you want a missile, that's what shot was for. If like that's why you picked it. You didn't pick it for the shot. That was just your missile weapon. And that's the case for a lot of short-range shooters that are very similar to each other and just have slight special variations here. So in this case, the reason is nothing to do with the guns. The guns are fine. It is entirely to do with the specials and how they affect the game.
Right, that's interesting because I remember like in Splatoon 2, T-Tech was very popular at one point. That's the one that had Splat Bomb and Inkjet. And we slowly transitioned from this like QR playstyle with that weapon into a special charge build with the Kensa shot. So like, I guess would you say like it's just a kit design issue and a playstyle issue that it just makes it so you just wanted a niche?
Yeah, I mean, shooters are always going, like, especially short-range shooters, are always just going to be dependent on how the specials around them are designed. And to some extent, the subs, like V-Splash is a good example, I'll talk about later because it's higher up the list, where the toolkit makes or breaks how these weapons play, and it can be such a drastic difference. And it's especially a thing for shooters that play around their kit so much. Sometimes true for other weapons, like Dread plays around its kit a lot. We'll get to Dread in a bit, but for short-range shooters, it applies a lot because there's so much overlap. So, yeah, Neosplash plays like a strike bot. And so that's not the fault of the gun.
Yeah.
The gun is fine, but that's just how Strike is designed. So if Strike creates unhealthy problems for the game, which it does, and it's probably also something to get to later, then Splash Neo is now the culprit for that, despite the fact that Splash itself has done nothing wrong.
Okay. All right. Let's get to Squeezer, because this is probably the outlier, maybe from an outsider perspective or someone looking at this list and just glancing at it. Tell me about Squeezer.
Yeah, I will say Flow Squeezer should probably be in solid. I think I ranked Flow Squeezer too low, but Squeezer is... this is going to be a long one. I've already worried about it.
We have time.
But I think a lot of times I've talked about and other people have talked about how people want strong main weapons, and Squeezer's kind of... There's like 4 main common midlines right now. You got Squeezer, Stamper, Range Blaster, Bucket. These are like kind of the main faces of that role. And I like all the others except Squeezer. So I want to talk a little bit about it because I think this gun is a really good example on how not to make a strong main weapon and how it's handled. So I'll talk a little bit about Bucket, Stamper, RB first a bit, just to give a bit of a contrast between how Squeezer affects things and how they affect it. So let's say you have a Slosher in your team comp. What does Slosher do for you? Slosher has like this big 70 damage hitbox that can hit around corners. So like on the frontline side of things, you could pick things with Bucket like Range, the regular Rapid, or Machine, for instance. If you pick backlines, you could do stuff like Rapid Pro Deco, Custom Explosher, Custom Wellstring, other AoE options there. Supportive-wise, you can pick things like Dreadringer or Dynamo with it. So these other options get directly enabled by having a Bucket in your comp, because the thing the weapon could do immediately allows you to build on that with other, especially generally weaker weapons than itself. So you pick it and you can pick other things because of it. Similar for if you pick Stamper, it's a little bit harder to tell, but like Stamper is a bit more of a faster playstyle midline wise. It doesn't really anchor as much and has better mobility and has good damage. So you can pair Stamper with other weapons that can kind of move and kill quickly from it. Other burst bomb weapons are very common with it. The AoE stuff works with it that I talked about, but also kind of more interesting stuff like Wiper or Dually Sculptures that are very mobile but have damage problems pair very nicely with Stamper's damage. So you get the idea. They have some kind of strength that enables other weapons to be picked into the comp that makes it more interesting. And that's generally the case for almost every midline, even some of the ones that aren't as strong, like Dually Squelchers. Dually Squelchers paints a bit more than most midlines. That's going to allow you to pick different things with it. They usually have some kind of quality, and because of that, they have a trade-off. Like Dually Squelchers doesn't deal a lot of damage, so that's kind of a problem. Bucket doesn't paint a lot. Range Blaster doesn't have a real kit or paint, or it's slow, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Squeezer is built with the same thing, and I think what's kind of interesting on Squeezer is it feels like Squeezer was built to be bad at the things shooters are good at that I just talked about with like Splattershot. It doesn't paint, and it doesn't get specials. So it can't play to that playstyle at all. Squeezer is very specialized for fighting, and that's also the way they balance the weapon. They've nerfed its ink efficiency, they've nerfed its paint, they've nerfed its points for special to make it more like that. Squeezer is so good at fighting, but it's so bad at everything else. So its weaknesses are paint and special output. But what do you build around for its strengths? Because the gun is just good at fighting. It has the straight speed of Splattershot, run speed stacks like it's on Splattershot. You have 96 kill time, but with more range, like 1 frame slower than Pro, but with even more range. You have perfect accuracy. What do you build around that? There's not really anything special that gets enabled by Squeezer. You pick Squeezer in your comp because it's just really good. But the strengths of the weapon don't really go, oh, I really want to pick this with Squeezer. And the other problem is, when it comes to the flaws, they're very important for these weapons because when you go against them, you need to feel like there's something to exploit. If you fight a range, the AoE is really annoying. So the trade-off has to be those moments where you close the gap, then the weapon is slow and you punish it. And it's like, okay, I exploited this weapon's weaknesses. But with Squeezer, the weaknesses of the weapon aren't something the opponents get to think about. Instead, it is a hindrance for your own team. It is your team's problem to deal with it because all it is paint and special output, which you'll notice something like Range and Bucket just have by default of their other problems. But like, your solution to Squeezer is not anything other than pick a really good painting weapon. I think Fuzzy put it best when talking about like Squeezer Neo Splash and how it's played in Japan of like, Neo Splash is 10 paint, 0 fighting. Squeezer's 10 fighting, 0 paint. So now the paint weakness is made up for because we picked a Splash. And now we have a Neo Splash that only gets to paint the whole game and gets to play really boring. And now the Squeezer is only fighting, and if you're fighting the Squeezer, you don't get to feel the paint weakness because they have a gun making up for that. So now what do you exploit about the weapon? Because someone else just covers it for you. And there's just nothing. So now the team comp's more limited. It's like more bland playstyle-wise. And when you go against the weapon, it doesn't feel like you have weaknesses to exploit. And so it just kind of feels miserable, especially when it's paired with something like Pen that also has a lot of range, and now you can't even walk forward and start shooting at them without 2 guns that can combo to insta-kill you before you can even get in range to begin firing at them. It's such a huge problem.
So from what it sounds like, it seems like because Squeezer is able to do one thing that it's really, really good at and everything else, it could be ignored, something else just comes in, does the opposite of what it's not good at, and it does that to an extreme, and it makes it feel like counterplay can be very difficult. Because, I mean, someone could say, like, I guess hear that and think, like, oh, well, isn't that teamwork in a way? Like, isn't that them kind of working off their weaknesses? Like, what would you say to that kind of counterpoint?
I mean, it is teamwork, but it's not the kind of teamwork you want. Like, if you have a range doing AoE, you need to be an active part of that process. You need to actively try and work off of the damage it provides, whatever your weapon does. If you're a mobile weapon, you have to go around corners. If you're a long-range weapon, you have to try to look for people running out of cover to avoid the blast radius. If you're another AoE weapon, you want to shoot at the same time. If you're fighting with Squeezer, you just paint. You just paint the map.
I see.
You kind of have to paint roughly where the Squeezer is, but you don't take part in the process of actually fighting the other guy. The Squeezer just does it for you. The most you'll do is maybe throw a bomb in the general direction of Squeezer. And I'm not trying to say that weapons can't pair to kill with Squeezer. Like, you can have two weapons that include Squeezer as one of them shooting the same person, but it doesn't really change too much about it. Whereas it does change a lot when you fight with a Stamper or a Bucket or a Dually Squelcher or a Wiper, etc., etc. And the worst part about all of this is 1/3 the problem with Squeezer. If this was Squeezer's only problem, it wouldn't be that big a deal. But Squeezer has 2 other big problems to get into. So I can talk
Okay.
about those if you're ready.
Yeah, go for it. So I would assume it's like it's sub and it's special because I mean we'll get onto it later on because of what specials
Yeah.
are shown in the tier list, but I would assume it's kit.
The kit is one of them.
Okay.
And this is also where the distinction provides between foil, because I think foil is fine. I don't have an issue with foil's kit, so foil doesn't have this issue. I think Vanilla Squeezer has the single most unhealthy kit in the entire game. And half of it has to do with wall.
Okay.
Because wall was very balanced in Splatoon 2. Because of how Splatoon 2 worked. In Splatoon 2, a lot of weapons had high ink efficiency. There was
Right.
Object Shredder. You had easy access to bombs with things like shooters. You had Suction 220 damage.
Mhm.
You had pre-nerf LDE. Bombs were unnerfed, so they were even more common. Object Shredder was easier to run because you didn't need stealth with cooler. And all of these things balanced out wall. And as we've developed further and further into Splatoon 3, these options have gone away. Like now you have a bunch of midline weapons, and the midline weapons have been balanced to be poor ink efficiency. How many bombs is a dually sculpture going to throw? Or a range, or a bucket? Not many, because that's how we balance those weapons. Even the support midlines. H3D can barely use a bomb if it had it. It doesn't even have one in this game. But like at the end of S2, it could barely throw its bomb. All of these things got tweaked, and you have all these midline weapons that don't do a lot of wall damage. Even stuff like Stamper and Wiper don't do good object damage to wall. So now we don't have any way of shredding wall. We don't have easy access to bombs to it. So bomb feels very annoying to deal with. And then you have Zuka. As a shooter, Squeezer cannot hit things that are out of line of sight. It's one of the only things you can kind of exploit is to play around cover a little bit. So then it panics a special instantly that has the biggest, most annoying blast radius in the game to 2-tap you. On top of just being able to be, a one-shot bazooka. And because Zuka has no startup, it can have that option instantly. If it sees like a bucket going around a corner to shoot it, it can pop Zuka and start shooting you before the bucket even starts shooting, which means it's gonna win the fight. So the special directly deals with one of the very few options to deal with this weapon. So the sub and special make you feel like you have even less options. You get close to the weapon, it has wall, and it has mobility to play around the wall, and the kill time to play around the wall of a short-range weapon. You try to take advantage of it by using corners or cover, it has the special that ignores that, and it just can pop it instantly. Foil, on the other hand, has a kit that's good, but it's a bit more dynamic. Like, Autobomb can reveal Sharkers, that's good for Squeezer, but it does just because an Autobomb locks onto you doesn't mean you're set for instant death. And Screen has a combo with it, but it also kind of forces Squeezer to go up close at times, or it has to work with it. And Screen is actually something you can build around comp-wise a bit, because very specific weapons like rollers take advantage of it. So foil works fine. But the vanilla kit just makes the gun feel more oppressive because it makes those few options you already had feel more restrictive and already harder to use.
Okay. I'm getting the idea of what you're trying to distinguish with Squeezer. And before, I could imagine someone saying, well, just shoot the wall, and then it'll go away.
Yeah, just break 800 HP, and the Squeezer kills you in 24 frames, by the way, and it kills you at more range than your weapon has, and it moves faster than you.
I always laugh at those comments, because, I play Bucket, so, someone just tells me, well, just shoot over the wall. It's why do you want me fighting a laser gun?
I mean, and it's not, sometimes you can do it, you can try, but it's so biased in the Squeezer's favor.
Right.
That, it's not worth it, or it feels like it shouldn't be this hard to make it happen. And for the record, because I'm going off on a weapon I don't play, and people are going to be pointing that out. It's fine to balance midlines to make the counterplay feel easier. I'll briefly, Range Blaster's AoE is probably too much right now for this game. They should probably make it smaller. There's nothing wrong with having a weapon shrinks being toned back a bit. But the thing is, if range has a slightly smaller AoE, the AoE is still notable. It's still there. We just toned it back a bit to be fair. For Squeezer, it's a little bit harder because it has so many different stats to tweak. It has range, it has RNG, it has strafe speed. There are so many different things to actually tweak about the weapon, whereas range is very clearly the AoE. Bucket is the 70 damage. Stamper is its combos just in general. Stamper is a little bit more, to be fair, but Stamper is hard to talk about.
Squeezer.
There's one more issue.
Oh, go for it. I was gonna say Squeezer seems to be very, very self-sufficient, and in a game that's designed around team play, it seems to be kind of that weird weapon that just gets thrown on there. Because like the weapons that you're mentioning are very interesting. So like Bucket, for example. Yes, it's a 70 damage weapon, but like it combos with a lot of things. Like a lot of people can play with a Bucket, follow up, clean up their mess, or the Bucket initiates a fight and gets the assist and fights with their teammates. Whereas Squeezer, it really does sound like this weapon does one thing, does it extremely good, and it kind of doesn't leave a lot of room for innovation when it comes to a team composition, because you just pick the other thing like, okay, Splash Neo, there you go, done. Whereas like what you were mentioning with Bucket and Range Blaster, you were listing a number of weapons that could potentially be on the team composition. So I just found that very interesting.
It's very self-sufficient, that's hard to say. And that's also why balancing is hard for stuff like Bucket, because the 70 damage hitbox is part of what makes it feel so good to have a Bucket under your comps.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if you do the ideal, like what people think of right away for nerfing Bucket and make it 60 damage, now anything that does under 40 is going to feel worse playing with the weapon.
It's like
you'll accomplish your job, but if you nerf it that way, what's more likely to happen is all the Bucket comps are just more restrictive now. Is that the problem?
Interesting.
Probably not.
Yeah. No, so you're thinking...
have to think of the effects of these balance changes when you adjust it.
Yeah, you're thinking of like how each weapon are connected, and like how connect the dots of like, if you do one thing to a weapon, you're indirectly buffing or nerfing another weapon. Whereas with Squeezer, it doesn't really... Like if you nerf Squeezer in whatever way, right? Like I'm not a game dev. I don't really know what they would do to the weapon. Maybe make it 230. I don't know. But it doesn't really seem like, a lot of people were saying once they got 220, it's done and so forth. But it's like, that's not why people play Squeezer.
Exactly. It's not even the reason you pick it. And that's the thing. Everything is connected. And one key part about balancing that I don't think I've really talked about a lot is you want to build these connections. Ideally, the more connections between weapons there are, the easier it is to make team comps. And it's especially nice for solo players, because the easier weapons work with each other, the more likely your random team composition isn't going to be, because you'll have a bit more you can do. And that's an interesting part of balancing where you have to think about that. And sometimes you have to lose these combos for balancing. One that I remember is Zuka Wavebreaker used to combo when Zuka did 60. And when they nerfed Zuka damage, an indirect side effect is Zuka Wave had less synergy. That was a combo that helped Wavebreaker. That was a lower down special. So there's always going to be these small things to think about for that.
Okay.
Anyway, one more problem with
go for it.
The last problem with Squeezer is it being a gatekeeper weapon. And I'm going to talk about Machine a little bit, because I think Machine is the best example of this. Pre-patch Machine, before the nerfs and everything, you saw nothing AoE-wise. Pretty much nothing. You didn't see rapids, you didn't see range, you didn't see anything. And it's because Machine was so much better than all of those. It had a really good kit, and it just had the best AoE. Like, range is a little bit bigger AoE-wise, but you don't have bucket angles. And think if pre-patch Machine was in this meta, it would combo with everything too. One pen hit, Machine kills you.
Right.
But so like they had to tone it down drastically, to the point where they probably overdid it. Five frames was too much. They can give a few.
It hurt for sure. Yeah.
5 was too much. But it was important to note that once Machine got out of the meta, all of a sudden these other AoE options start seeing use.
They
quite
flooded,
a lot of them that we have.
Yeah, they flooded in. Yeah.
And Squeezer is doing, Vanilla Squeezer specifically again, but a little bit for Foil too, admittedly, is doing the same thing. Imagine how close Vanilla Squeezer is to 96. They have the same kill time. They both play around wall, but 96 has less range, it has less mobility, and it has a weaker special. And the other thing is the kit is more interesting on 96, and 96 is easier to comp build with it. Kraken gives a recall that's really interesting for dive style comps, to be able to give a marker to jump in while you're moving forward. Kraken keeps the weapon speed penalty there because it's a slower special, so it feels like it's a bit more stable of a niche with tanking. And because it's not as broken as Squeezer, 96's paint is still, like, you know, not amazing, but it's at the level to where you don't need a guy dedicated to doing nothing but painting the floor to supplement it. You can just have a normal short-range shooter player that can do both fighting and painting, like maybe a little more to painting, and you have normal comps with it. There's stuff like Dually Squelcher. If you like the mobility of Squeezer, Dually Squelcher exemplifies that and enhances it even more, but has trade-offs with the kill time. It's a bit of a different weapon than Squeezer, but Squeezer competes with it because if you want your mid-range mobile weapon, Squeezer is just better for it. And then there's, of course, Nautilus is probably the most comparable weapon. Nautilus also has a fast kill time and stuff like that, but Nautilus has to play around this unique charge hold weakness, and it still has a bit less range and a bit better paint. So all of these other mid lines are more interesting. They're more dynamic for team comps. They have more healthy playstyles and kits, and all of them are gate kept by this one weapon. And it's not like you don't ever see them, but if you're trying to play to win, like, you won't pick them. You see people pick them from people who love these weapons and want to make them work because of that. Like, you'll see a Dually Squelcher player do well with Dually Squelcher because they like Dually Squelcher. You won't see a non-Dually Squelcher player go and play Dually Squelcher. That's the problem. You want these weapons to have their uses. And that's why I think Squeezer has to go into a niche. Because I think Vanilla Squeezer has to be a point where maybe its unique range or whatever is left over is good for some long range stages, but for the most part, these other weapons are what should see use over it. Stuff like H3 or CDS or 96 or Nautilus, I think are the better versions of these. Maybe you can save Foil Squeezer though.
Okay.
If we nuke the Vanilla Squeezer kit, maybe you can make Foil Squeezer work, but I really don't know how they're going to balance it. And I'm not sure what they're going to do in the patch coming up. I think it'll be out by the time this video is live, but
probably.
That's something I'm really thinking about is like, what are they actually going to do to Squeezer? Are they going to do like a fire rate or a range nerf, and how will that affect the game? Maybe there'll be a way it can work out. And if you like Squeezer, there's nothing wrong with that. The weapon's fun. If I could mash, I would play it.
Yeah.
But when I look at it purely outside the game from like an analytical coach POV, watching the game, watching competitive matches, I can't help but feel that Squeezer is drastically limiting the potential of the game.
It's I think, I don't remember where I heard this, but it's like the game feels extremely different once you start playing against a good Squeezer, because it feels like you can't really do anything.
It's so different. I cannot and it makes everything else feel harder as well. It's insane. Like, the game feels a little different. Like, if you fight Gray on Range Blaster, it feels crazy. But it's like fighting Squeezer in general just feels crazy. As long as someone's able to get the basic playstyle down, it's there. And really good Squeezers are even harder. Like, if you fight Atomic, it is... Yeah. Oh my god.
It's very scary. I mean,
Atomic is one of the hardest players to fight in the game, and it's a combination of everything that weapon can do with the player who has enough discipline to always be doing the most annoying thing at a given time in a match.
There's some times where either I'm fighting against them or I'm seeing them on stream and I'm just like, how do they hit that? I digress. But I do know, like, some people would probably say, well, Chara, Squeezer is very hard to play. Right? It's very hard to learn. Why would you want to relegate it to a niche, given that so many people invest so many hours in learning this weapon?
Okay. Truth be told, it's a fair point. Like, realistically, you want your hard to use weapons to be the ones at the top.
Yeah.
But the thing, the weapon being hard to use cannot be the only reason it's good. It can't. It cannot be the sole reason. A weapon being hard to use is good to make sure that there's a skill investment. It's the kind of thing where you want players to be dedicated to these weapons. You want there to be growth and room for them to push the weapons. But the weapon also needs to have a positive effect on everything else, because the Squeezer player isn't the only one in the lobby. There's 7 other people. The weapon that's there needs to also matter for them. And so that's why it also matters that these weapons have other positive effects, because this unfortunately isn't a single player game. If it was, then Squeezer, great, perfect, awesome. Plenty of depth you can build around there, but this isn't, and you have to have other people that are able to have ways of expressing themselves. And the other thing to note is the difficulty of playing Squeezer is also, there's a difficulty of everyone else to take into account. You want these matchups to be dynamic and have skill expression for them as well. There's not a whole lot of ways to express skill in the way you deal with Squeezer versus dealing with other weapons with more defined strengths and weaknesses. So Squeezer has a lot of skill expression for itself, but doesn't have a lot of skill expression for the players going against it. Not as much. And that's also the problem with stuff like Leader that we just talked about, where despite Leader being very hard to use, the counter to play to Leader is not, it's very transparent, very simple, very one-dimensional. So even though Squeezer's hard to use, even though Leader is hard to use, that's a problem to work around with it.
Yeah.
I hope there's a way to fix it, because Squeezer is cool. I think it's a very unique weapon design. I like the idea of it. And frankly, it's like the only new shooter they're doing something interesting with since Splatoon 1. And like, I think that Squeezer is a numbers overtuned problem, and that's a hard problem to fix.
Yeah.
It might not even be fixable. It might have to be this niche weapon, which is why I'm putting it there. But, maybe it works out, and I hope it does. We really just have to see what the devs do. But for now, when I'm looking at all the trade-offs of balance here, I think that the game at large will benefit from a weaker Squeezer more than it will suffer.
Okay.
So I think that's the root for it. And that's always what you have to look at balance-wise is like there's always going to be negative trade-offs when you buff or nerf something. And you just have to think of what's worth it for the overall picture.
Right. And the core idea here for those of you still watching with us is that it seems like the team dynamic is really important to you. Like you brought up, like it's not a single player game. Like I guess if it was like Smash Ultimate to compare it to like another Nintendo game, if you had the Squeezer equivalent in that game and you grinded hours to play that weapon or character, you're gonna see the fruits of like your hard work. But in a game where there's 7 other people with you, you want a weapon that contributes, with those other 3 weapons on your team. Okay.
Yeah, and team play is a hard thing to find a balance with because you want weapons to have enough toolkits to be somewhat self-sufficient, but you also want there to be enough there to encourage teamwork. Okay. The best kind of solution is to have weapons that can kind of do both, where they can be self-sufficient, but they'll still benefit from team play.
Okay.
You don't have to force people to do it because there are going to be levels of play where people just don't coordinate, and the game can't feel miserable for them. Right. Like if you're in A rank and people don't coordinate, the game still has to feel fun and enjoyable because some people will just be A rank for years and the game can't be miserable for them too. So you have to think about that as well. Okay. And that's a whole nother topic. I think that's kind of interesting for some of these weapons because we've had some weapons like that, like Splash and Ballpoint at their peak, that they kind of can do everything, but because of how they were designed specifically, and I did a whole video on this that you can link, because I think it's too much for this discussion. Because of the specific way they were built and their toolkits, they worked really well at naturally always working with people, regardless of what role they were playing, because of their ability to do everything. And that's kind of interesting, because there are a few weapons like that still around. Like Pencil is one of them. Pencil's actually a lot more dynamic at top level than people give it credit for, because it's not the main painter in that comp. So it goes between fighting and painting and having that flexibility. And Pen has problems, but that part is kind of cool. It's kind of nice that the Pen players have a lot of different flexibility to play to, especially given they're the cooler weapons. And all the time the cooler and armor weapons have to just be the special bots. Yeah. It's nice that they have more to do. A little overtuned for sure, but it's kind of interesting to think about the contrast between that and weapons that clearly need a lot more team play to help make work. And so that's something you have to think about. Splatoon 2 leaned very much into the you can't do anything by yourself, and it suffered for it. And Splatoon 1 leaned too much into you are a one-man army that can solo everyone if you pick the right weapon. And I think for the most part, Splatoon 3's done a good job of having kits that are kind of in the middle, where they have tools to help their teammates. But if you have to just work for no one but yourself, you, for the most part, will have a way to do that a little bit better. Especially the better balanced some of the kits will get. Yeah. So there's so many different little topics when it comes to game design and balancing. There's so many different things you have to think for. I'm hoping that so far this discussion is opening up that there's so much stuff that the devs have to consider. I don't even know if they're thinking about all of this, and there's probably things they're thinking about that we're not, and they also have all this data and other stuff. Game balancing is very hard. Yeah. It's good to be aware of just how many things go into every little change. And every little thing that gets balanced and how to do it properly and different balance philosophies. So for me, it's so interesting. I love talking about it. I love thinking about it. I'm hopefully getting better at my understanding of it over time.
I'm hopeful because I remember Hitzel posted an interview with a developer for Splatoon, and he was talking about that they wanted to make Splatoon a way where casual players can enjoy it, but someone who's been into shooters for a long time can pick up the controller, learn something new, and get into it. So, but as well, remember, comment section, friendly reminder, this is competitive play. So we're talking about that in that context. So that's interesting. Okay, talked a lot about this tier list and Squeezer. let's go on to Solid, because this is where we start to see, I guess, a little bit more weapon diversity. So we see different type of weapons start to fill out into here. How would you generalize this particular tier, Solid?
This is almost exclusively filled by weapon kits that have some form of limitation, but it's not that bad. Like,
Okay.
how good can you make a carbon with caster? How good can you make a dread with wavebreaker? How good can you make an S-blast with sprinkler?
Okay.
Stuff like that.
Okay.
But there's nothing here inherently super wrong with any of these weapons. Like, there's qualities of them that are a little annoying, but nothing here is like too much. Like Gal is a little bit annoying with wall.
Right.
Dot has a little bit of shredding against short range weapons, depending on the meta. Brush has like a hitbox a bit, but nothing here is like, the amount of big deal compared to the stuff in the previous tiers has dropped significantly. A lot of this is just these weapons have a more interesting kit or a easier kit to balance or a better version of it that are the preferred choice for me to see. To where these are the less picked option of the two. And then Gluga is also here because I have to specify that like Gluga's a mystery in terms of like kits and balance and how to fix it and how unhealthy it would be if it would be good and how to tweak it. So Gluga's just here. I don't have Gluga's like the one weapon that I talk about where I'm like, yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
So I just put Gluga in the middle. Because in theory, maybe Wall Booyah could be kind of annoying. It's got the Gal 2-shot at a distance, but I don't know. So, no, I barely see this weapon. It's so hard to evaluate it.
Okay. So there's a big gap between our previous tier list and this one where these weapons can be good in competitive play, but they just have some flaws, whether it's their sub-weapon, the main weapon, or I guess the special. I mean, I see ballpoint.
Yeah, these are weapons like I wouldn't mind seeing these weapons picked, but they're not like there are other weapons that I think have positive attributes on the game, and that's where we get to the next tier. The next tier is weapons that start to positively change how the game is played or create interesting dynamics.
Okay.
So these don't really do anything wrong, and some of them have some interesting stuff. Like Paintbrush has like this location-oriented kit, but there are other location-oriented kits that build around things better. I would say these are like the relatively harmless tier. These are just middle of the road weapons that like, if I see them in a few matches, cool, it's fine. But I don't think anything special of them.
So let's do like a little bit of a
130 carbon caster. Let's go.
I wonder if they're ever gonna get to like 150 if things keep going down.
I hope they keep doing it for only carbon. It's so funny. Please just only buff carbon point for special.
So, you were mentioning how like there are some of these weapons that have like some attributes, but they can be done better once we start moving up the tier list. So like, I guess I want to look at a few just to give our listeners and viewers some examples. So like the brushes are meant to be kind of like that annoying weapon that's behind you, QR type of playstyle. Would you say these go here and then like something like Tetras is the equivalent to it, but it just does it better?
I wouldn't say anything's the equivalent to the brushes specifically.
Okay.
Brushes are kind of one where I can't equivalent, but like, what would be one? Like, I would say the location stuff, for instance. Actually, that's not a good comparison because the paintbrush is a different role. Like, I'd say like heavy spotting, for instance. Heavy kind of plays this like very paint heavy backline that can fight easily against other shorter range weapons. So you'll see like a heavy spotting ego some mid lines or short range weapons sometimes and walk forward, but play very painty. And I think the vanilla heavy does this playstyle better by keeping the main weapon more active and by giving a sub and special that can help its teammates out a little bit more. Whereas this one feels like its toolkit interrupts the weapon's game plan, and Kraken's interesting on some weapons because taking away the gun for a bit to be a Kraken is a big trade-off. But on heavy, I feel like this is not a weapon where I want it to go away. I want it to keep existing on the map. Okay. So there isn't as much intrigue. And so I think the vanilla heavy does that kind of role a little bit better. But it's not really the most drastic thing in the world.
I see. So it's kind of like with I guess to pick on two weapons that are similar because they have the same main weapon. So like Machine Neo, Dreadringer D, we see Machine Vanilla and the Vanilla Dread a tier above. So they have one aspect of them that you would prefer because they contribute more in a competitive context.
Yes,
Okay.
I think the vanilla kit of Machine is a little more healthy, obviously, as well, because no Zuka, but
Right.
I think the flexibility the Fizzy Booyah provides you in playstyle gives more dynamic decision making and options to do than Machine Neo's access. Similar for, Vanilla Dread. I think the toolkit just gives you a little bit more to do. So I think the weapon's playstyle mid-match is more dynamic. I think it's more interesting. And I think there's more of a flexibility between its playstyle. But Dread will be its own thing, because I gotta talk about Dread. Dread is the whole thing, but Vanilla Dread is the one we're talking about. I'm gonna leave Dread D down here. Where,
Okay.
yeah, maybe in a world where Wave and Beacon were buffed, it'd be like kind of interesting on a few maps, and that's the peak of Dread D in my eyes.
I mean, I guess someone watching this would also probably ask about S-Blast, but I think you made a whole entire video on, like...
I mean, S-Blast's other kit is just going to be more dynamic.
Much better, yeah.
That's its identity, it's the Burst Bomb Blaster of this game.
Yeah.
And that's its whole thing. The short range mode competes with Luna. You need the Burst Bomb to enable some long range combos to have more flexibility. So then the weapon feels like it has a more unique identity between its flexibility and more options with the kit. And without Burst Bomb, the weapon's very hollowed out. And it's still kind of cool, but between that and having to balance Sprinkler Reef Slider, I don't really see a way to make it too much better than this.
So I do
in a good way.
I do see some like weapons here with like I guess I'm a bit surprised with, for example, Blaster here being solid with Bubble, and Mini with Bubble, and I guess Roller with Bubble as well, and Squiffer actually. So there's 4 weapons.
Yeah,
with
you might
Bubble
notice a pattern.
yeah. So like, talk to me about that. So earlier we were talking about all the way at the bottom. There are some specials here that are pretty annoying. They're global range, Tenna missiles, killer whale. Talk to me about the bubbles. Why are they solid?
I mean, Bubble has okay, I want to talk about Bubble because I see too much discussion about Bubble in terms of like, oh my god, guys, weapon triangle time. Remember?
Yeah, I remember that.
This is so good. Zuka gets countered by Bubble, which gets countered by Strike, which gets countered by Zuka. Oh my god, that's awesome. No, it doesn't work with specials.
Yeah.
That does not work with specials. Here's the extent of the interaction. Like, it is that. Okay, if I'm a Zuka player and there's a Bubble, my special just doesn't do anything to it. That's the interaction. If I'm a Bubble player and I'm fighting a Strike, well, 1 Strike is on my Bubble, GG. I lose. It's like, that isn't fun. And Bubble has this problem with a lot of specials where either the special just demolishes it, like Booyah Bomb, Tri-Strike, Kraken, and the special just loses, or it's like a Jetpack, Zuka, and Bubble just wins. It's not dynamic. When you have something like a Crab's a good, it's another kind of HP one that has counters, but it's more dynamic, right? Like, you can Zuka a Crab, but Crab has mobility to avoid or tank some of the shots, to where Zuka still wins, but it's much more risky. It's kind of back and forth. Crab can shoot at, like, a Jetpack in the air, but Jetpack can also easily break Crab. So these interactions aren't as clear-cut. They aren't as one-sided. There's more back and forth between the two. And Main Weapons has a very similar problem, to where if you get in the bubble and break it, some weapons have no way of really approaching bubble or killing someone in a bubble, and some weapons do. Some weapons have no way of shredding a bubble shield, and some do. So depending on what you're picking, it's very either one-sided in the bubble favor or one-sided without. And what needed to happen balance-wise is these interactions needed to be tweaked to where they were more even. Because you don't want specials that are just, I pick this special, and you need to pick this special, or you need to pick this weapon now. That's not fun.
Okay.
It should feel like everyone has an option. Like, allow it to be enough of a difference to where you have some team comp building decisions, like you can choose to run more Bubble Shred. But if you have like a Zuka, you shouldn't, Zuka has problems. I don't like Zuka either. Like, Zuka should not be helpless into Bubble. It should not do nothing. It should do something. That's why I didn't like the damage buff they gave Bubble in the last patch, because Bubble was already good enough to be a Zuka counter. So what are we doing at this point? We're just making the matchup even more one-sided, but already was good enough to see used as a Zuka counter. It didn't need this. This is just overkill.
I see.
And that's a problem with a lot of the bubble weapons.
Okay. So there, it's that kind of like, I guess people want to see the rock, paper, scissors kind of triangle, like you were saying, like, but you're saying like there should be more back and forth because things are more complex. Like, I think of it like with Pokemon, with the 3 original types, like, yes, fire beats grass, grass beats water, water beats fire, but it gets more complex once you start introducing like abilities and what moves they can learn to counter the other type. It's not a clear cut.
If Pokemon was just fire, water, and grass against each other, you wouldn't have a very fun video game.
Yeah, it would suck.
More dynamic options.
Yeah, it would suck. Like,
especially in the team setting, you need that dynamic option.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. We also see like a bit more. I mean, like two Zuka weapons here, and then we're seeing patterns here. We're seeing patterns here.
You see your fair share of unhealthy specials with stuff like Whale, Bubble, Slider, Missiles, et cetera, are going to be lower down.
Okay. All right. This one, a little less controversial than our last tier, right? Let's move on to good. I feel like it's getting better. Like, the game is feeling more fun again.
Yeah, we're getting a lot better. Like, we have T-Tech. T-Tech is like Neo Splash, but it doesn't paint as well and it fights more. So now we have a more dynamic playstyle and a bit less strike spam. Stuff like that.
How would you classify the good tier list? So I think you kind of alluded to it already with T-Tech, but go ahead.
These are weapons that have a unique identity. They tend to have stuff to invest into. They provide a lot more interest comp building wise, but they can't be absolutely everywhere. Like, you can't have a Charger in every game. You need the Splatlings to be able to play the game too. Chargers can be oppressive if they're too common, so they shouldn't be 100% everywhere. But this is still a pretty healthy Charger. It has a kit that's like good for the game. It helps out its team a decent bit. It has a pretty dynamic play style. It works pretty well. Stuff like that. Okay. You have, Foil Flingza. You have Dynamo Roller. Stuff like that. Carbon. That are all like pretty good with their identity. 96 is the tank thing I talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. But they have a bit more dynamicness to them. Stuff like Carbon, for instance. It has Burst Bomb to help its team a little bit while also being a Sharking Roller. That's why it's higher than Reg Roller, because there's a little bit more to Carbon's playstyle. You can pick weapons that combo with the Burst Bomb more, so it's a bit easier to build comps around Carbon because of its kit. And so that helps out a lot, and there's a bit more to do playstyle-wise. And then you have like some weapons that are the center of a playstyle, like Tetras are, the classic run it down 24/7 and take attention. And you can't have that playstyle be absolutely everywhere with Tetra, but it's still good enough to where most of the time, you would be cool to see that. 10 shield, other stuff like that. Things that are, some things here are a little too extreme to be everywhere, but in general, there are like a lot of cool ideas here, generally healthy kits and unique playstyles to enable. This is where things start to get good.
Okay. Let's address the elephants in the room, because I know some people might be like, I guess, confused of some Zuka weapons being here and some bubble weapons being here as opposed to like the tier below. And we'll finish it off with like Dread, because I know you mentioned you wanted to talk about that one. So like, talk to me about Carbon, and I believe it's Sorelatent that has the Zuka one. So why would you say these are good Zuka weapons for the game?
So sorry.
Go for it.
So remember, we both have the same habit of like looking like we finish a sentence and then talking a bit more.
Yeah.
Carbon, like, remember how I talked about how Shot's game plan revolves around Zuka, and that's the problem? This is the opposite. Zuka is a part of Carbon, but it is not the main thing. So there's only two or three Zukas. And then it helps that Zuka makes the comps with Carbon easier because it functions as an entry tool and it helps cover its range. So not only is Zuka less common, the times it is common, it serves a bit more of a beneficial purpose for team building.
Okay.
So that's basically it. It's not the center of the playstyle. And like, it still limits it. It's one of the reasons Carbon isn't higher, frankly.
I see.
It's enough to where, hey, it can be higher in this case.
Okay, so its identity is not the Zuka spammer, and that's the only thing it primarily does in a competitive setting. Therefore, it allows it to do other stuff for its team. So, okay,
yes.
Okay, that's interesting. We talked about Tetras. I would assume Dooley's kind of the I forgot what that one's called. And Parries. They're kind of like that run it down style. I would say custom, right? Custom Blaster, and then the Luna Blasters as well. Kind of like that run in style.
I mean, Luna and Blaster are a bit more shark heavy. I think this Blaster is just a bit more of a healthy kit, and the splashdown plays on it are just fun to watch.
Okay.
It's very high risk, high reward for big kill streaks. And Lunas have very healthy kits as well. There's just some limits to balancing these without them going much higher in this case to where they're here, but I think this is a fine spot for them. This is pretty good.
Talk to me about Dread. You know,
Dread should be at the top. It should be so much higher. It should be awesome. It should, like, this is such a cool weapon because it's like this midline fighting weapon, but it also, like, it doesn't fight that well. It's supposed to lean primarily supportive and fight a little bit. And when it fights, it kind of almost like rapid, just does reliable chip damage. This time at like 40 to 4, the 42 to 48 damage.
Yeah.
But like its fall off is a reliable 70. It's all these big combo numbers to where it's clearly not supposed to be the main thing fighting. Even 9-ing people for like a shooter to finish them off. But the kits don't let it work. This kit, like, it doesn't actually have a support kit. This is supposed to take the role of a short-range shooter weapon. And this could be a topic of its own. So many weapons that could do short-range shooter jobs of like painting, throwing bombs, and supporting with specials get fumbled. Mini got fumbled, Reflux gets fumbled, Dread gets fumbled. There's so many of them, and it sucks because it would be really cool if we didn't see a short-range shooter every time in that slot, and we saw other weapons that could do it, but they always get fumbled, and I'll get to those. But Dread is one of them where this has the ink efficiency to be able to poke bombs. This has a unique paint style. And then the other thing is this is supposed to be the AoE enabler for that. Like, this is one of two, admittedly, because Dynamo, but Dynamo's locked to cooler. This is your AoE enabling paint weapon to take a short range comp. Like, you could pick with other AoE guns, it paints the map in an interesting way, and it should get an entry special to help comps like that. Instead, you stop painting, you stop dealing reliable damage to slide in and fight people. And like, if Reef Slider was balanced a certain way, maybe it could work. But your comps are always going to be less interesting because now your other weapons have to cover your entry specials. So your comps are significantly limited. You can't play with something like a Well String or a Range Blaster. You have to pick it with like Bucket. Like, Bucket works because of Strike. Okay, you have to pick like Dread, Bucket, and something else with a decent entry because the special limits it so much. But imagine a world where this thing had like a crab. Still take away the weapons paint for a bit. Why not? Let's have that as a weakness. Now you can run it with so many different stuff. You can pick with Dynamo. You can pick with all the other AoE stuff I mentioned Bucket could enable. You can do that. But now you have a weapon in the support slot instead of one of your Slayer slots. It takes a different position in the comp than Bucket does. And thus you get to run different things with it, including each other. They both work with each other. But you could run different things with it and create more unique comps. And it's in a role that is the most stale role. Short-range shooter being the support has been a thing for like 5 years. Yeah. We haven't had something that wasn't really, the last time we had something in the short-range slot that painted and played a supportive role was N-Parry Dooley in S2 with Jetpack. And it didn't even really fit the role clearly, but like Jetpack was really good. So you would like farm Jetpack as your supportive option to get back in. We haven't had something like that since. Actually, I kind of forgot V-Dooley. V-Dooley technically counts, but V-Dooley is not very common.
Yeah.
And Parry was the last time it was common. V-Dooley works if you're very dedicated, but it's hard. I'll get to that later. But like stuff like Dread, and we'll talk about Reflux and Mini later on when we get to them. Mm-hmm. I wish had these supportive kits. They are my number one hope for third kits.
Okay.
Let these interesting playstyles actually enable other things. And it makes it so much easier to build unique team comps when you have weapons like these, because stuff like Dread with a proper kit for support are enablers. You can build comps and the other weapons have less strict requirements because Dread covers a lot of it. That's what stuff like Splash and Ballpoint did that I talked about, where like, hey, if you had a Splash and a Ballpoint, your other two weapons could be so many different things because Splash and Ballpoint covered so much of what you needed in a comp. That you had this freedom and flexibility to pick other weapons with them that would normally be hard to pick in a team comp. Yeah. And you need stuff like that because the only thing right now we have that fits that is like Pencil. Pencil makes it really easy to pick whatever other 3 weapons you want. Really easy.
Right. It's a good enabler, and it allows people to kind of experiment. Experiment in the front lines, in the front lines, because I know some people might say like, oh well, you can't pick Ballpoint anymore, blah 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 blah. You can't pick Zap. I understand, but I mean like in the front lines, like you could pick Slosher, you could pick Stamper, you could pick Shot. I mean, you could pick Range Blaster. I mean, there's so many different options in the front with what Pencil could do, and you feel that Dread could have had that role if it just had a better kit. Yeah.
Red should have been one of them. Also, Dynamo is one of the... While I'm here, Dynamo's one of the fumbles, too. Dynamo should have enabled. Dynamo, like, it feels... Dynamo and Dread aren't really short-range weapons, but they take the role of the short-range shooter. I know that's a little confusing. I just want to clarify that. I'm saying they take the paint support slot.
Yeah.
And it's good that they're not locked to short range, because then you can have that role be different. That's also why H3 was cool, because H3 was a more mid-range version, and we got it H3 too.
Yeah.
Short range shooters in this role.
Dread is really unique because, like, when it came to the bucket class, like, for me, it feels like that type of weapon that can do different things in a match depending on your teammates. So, like, you have a very heavy chip comp, Dread can cover that. You have a team that wants to paint a lot, Dread can do that. But those type of roles, I always felt like shooters kind of played that role, like you were saying. Like, I feel like shooters play the kind of like the glue for a lot of team compositions. It's very hard seeing the game since Endgame. I mean, even since the start of S2 for a little bit, it's very hard to see a team composition not have at least one shooter, because it fulfills a specific role that the game needs. And it sometimes feels Nintendo does introduce some non-shooter weapons, and then one part of the kit just seems like, well, okay. I mean,
you put it perfectly. Just to point out real quick.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
The glue of the comp. Perfect term for it. The glue of the comp is always a short-range shooter.
Yeah.
That, like, introducing weapons like Dread are interesting because you allow a bucket to be the glue. That's never been a thing. Ever. You've never had a bucket be the, like, centerpiece to enable other things in a comp. This is the first time that could happen. And it just didn't, because we didn't give it a kit to let that version go through.
Yeah. Because, like, I always felt weird. Like, some people would say, like, oh, why don't you run, like, a double bucket comp? And, like, if you would, what would you pick? I would have been like, well, Dread and, so, like, regular Slosher go really well together, but you can't run that.
But
like,
yeah,
like, I wouldn't want to run Machine and Slosher, for example, but I would love to run Slosher and Dread, because it just works so well together. But
and Dread Machine works too.
Yeah,
also really good.
Yeah. So it feels weird when you're relegated to a specific role that, like, I know there's some players out there that are really self-aware. They like to take on that supportive role, but they're basically just relegated to playing shooters primarily. And that kind of sucks, you know? In a game where there's so many different weapon classes and you have so many different options.
Dude, it's me in this game. I like support more in this game than Slayer.
Okay.
If Dread had a good kit, for instance, just as one of them, I'd probably never play anything else. Well, not never, but I'd almost never play, because I love support.
Yeah.
But I don't like playing shooters, and it's just very. And I don't like Pen either. I have to be fair. I like Pen as a concept. It's not for me.
Yeah.
I'm not the person to play it.
Yeah.
That's also why I'm hoping. I do. There's one exception. It's technically a dually, but shooter like. Custom Dowsers is really fun for me, though. I hope they save Dowsers. I would play Dowsers. I would be bad at them, but I would desperately try not to be.
Well, you know, Dowsers is in our next tier list, so let's.
We'll get to them.
I think we're good with this tier right here. I think we get the core idea of these are the enablers. They do something for the team. I
think we can talk about the next two together, honestly, because these two tiers are very correlated.
Okay,
like so the only difference, just to get off the bat, is like. The best is just weapons I like seeing a little bit more. I think they have a little bit more to them, but like realistically, these two tiers are like if I could have a perfect meta in a perfect world, these two tiers are I would want to watch like almost exclusively these weapons is what I would want to watch.
Okay.
I would see matches full of them.
So these can basically be one lump sum. It's just the ones at the top. These are the ones you would prefer a little bit. I do see some like very notable trends with them, but I'll talk about that later. Let's start off with strong. Why would you consider these weapons strong in your perfect meta?
These are like the fully realized archetypes of different playstyles. All of them are, but like I think 89 is a great jumping off point. So remember how we just leveled up from Neosplash to T-Tech because it's a little bit more flexible?
Right.
Now it's one more time. This is still a weapon that you fight with your special, and it still is a painting special, but now we have a more healthy special that's less spammable, and it's more interesting to work with. Chumps are way better than Strike in terms of a design perspective. They're almost instant to use, so it's very easy. There's more dynamic counterplay for the opponents, which means, you know, when Chumps land, how players work around Chumps is really interesting, And they still paint a lot and enable, like, when you're doing it. Because it has a cooldown, the Zap's going to be fighting more. So now you have the most healthy, like, to me, this is the most healthy playstyle for a short-range shooter with a painting specials, like, as its job. This is the peak of that role archetype. That is the highest version of that idea. You know, and then L3 is the Burst Bomb Slayer shooter. You know, you'd have to balance stamp a lot to make it work, but that's the short-range shooter that paints, but has a special to go in with and has a Burst Bomb niche. Like, L3D was this same thing in S2, and it was higher because it was Jetpack, but it's the same idea, just unfortunately now you have a special that requires a bit of team comp building around it. So stuff like that is here.
Okay. So these...
There are some missed opportunities, though, because Tri Nouveau is in this tier for being a unique short-range shooter comp enabler, because the fizzy bombs are interesting, and you have, like, more fighting. Tri-Slosher Nouveau is kind of like an anti-rushdown compared to a Zap team.
Yeah.
Because you cannot run this thing down, and then fizzies cover the range.
It keeps the short range in check.
But to be here, it needs 190p, and it's 210. Oh my god, so many comps got nuked by Tri-210. I hate it. Like, actually nuked off the face of the planet because of Tri-210. I would kill to see Tri-200p in the patch. Tri-200 would probably be enough to make things work a little bit, but oh my god. Tri-210 was sad. And then the other one is Mini. Like I talked about, it would be really cool if this could be the short-range shooter role, but it isn't. Luckily, Mini is so good at fighting that this is like, hey, if you balance Stamp, maybe you could run Mini as the midline, and it would still cover paint, so it could still be interesting for comps, but not as interesting as if it was also an entry tool for the team. So, those are there. I think Charcoal's fine, as is. I think the main weapon's hitbox is just a little... That's literally, like, the only reason it can't go higher. But, you know, really cool archetype for a weapon, and Jetpack is cool. And it's just, like, this slow-moving, but really high-value situation where, like, every time this weapon dashes in, it's hype. It's like, you don't know if it's going to kill, like, 2 people, or if it's going to die mid-charge slash and give, like, a hype kill to the opposing player. It's so cool. I love that.
The Tri Nouveau nerf over time really sucks, too, because... I don't know if this was the last 20XX. All I know is a major that was happening. There was a Japanese team called Fiesta that ran the Tri Nouveau dually. I think there was a shot in there.
Rapid Deco shot. I remember the comp. I remember it to a T because it was such a cool comp.
It was so cool at the time, and especially now.
So much synergy there.
Especially now when like we see the primary cooler weapon being Pen. And obviously, Pen has its own uniqueness in the fact that it enables other type of frontlines to also play. But like, it would be so cool if we saw Tri Nouveau archetype weapon compositions or heavy edit weapon. I mean, we're seeing a little bit more of heavy edit where Snipe Rider might not be the best pick there. Like, I think some people pick it on like Flounder because charges generally aren't that good there anymore compared to like an S1. But Tri Nouveau going to 210 just sucks a lot. But I mean, it just goes to show like how Turf War could really impact the ranked modes, because I think that's the primary reason why that weapon got gutted.
Yeah, it was. Tri Nouveau Rapid was such, like, just briefly, Fizzies for the Rapid Blaster, Tri Nouveau for making sure people don't face rush the Rapid. Perfect synergy. And then Dually works so well with all the different chip damage. And the crowd works with it. It's like those three have such a trio of synergy. The shot's there, it's fine, it paints the map. Shot could realistically have been other weapons in the comp, could have been cool, but those three were so cool together. Yeah. There was so much synergy there. Like, so many unique dynamic interactions. And the Tri Nouveau being taken out ruined it for the other two. Yeah. Now those two you don't see that anymore. They're just gone. All of it's gone because of that one weapon.
And what I hate about the change, too, is that it basically forced Tri Nouveau to play a specific role where it feels like you just are chucking fizzy bombs, charging for your tactic cooler, kind of like rinse and repeat.
Yeah,
but
now
like
you can't fight as much.
Yeah, you don't
dedicate your lifestyle, your gear build, your play style, everything to cooler farming. So now the weapon feels like to play.
It doesn't feel like what Tri is meant to do, which is to keep those short range weapons in check. And I felt like that would have been a good check to have during the peak of Zuka meta when you had like double shot. I mean, I think during that time,
it was so good into the double shot.
I think it was like maybe 200, but like it was gearing towards 210, and I was just like, I remember because like
that's why I don't like that nerf. It's
like,
you know, if you had to tone it back, make the main weapon a little less oppressive against short range, it's pretty good into that. That's fine, but now you ruin the other part of the playstyle. Now there's no dynamic between it, because before it got cooler. You know, it didn't get too much cooler, but it got it fast enough to where the main weapon had opportunities to go fight.
Yeah.
And now those opportunities are gone because it has to spend it getting cooler because of that change. It negatively affected not just how good the weapon is, but also it affected the way the weapon had to play.
Yeah.
The only real way to save it is like playing it with a double cooler comp, and like it's just more,
which sucks, right?
A fraction of the comps.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of reminds me of when like you would run probably like double armor in S2, maybe like on Black Belly, or Mako Mart, you would put like the Tri-Slosher with ink armor. And it's just like, come on, like, can't you just give me one Tri kit? Yeah.
Fizzy was the fix to that problem because it gave Tri enough paint to be the solo cooler, because that was the problem with S2's kit. That's why I like came around to Tri Nouveau's kit as being really cool. It's like, oh my god, replacing the burst with Fizzy is genius. It's just as good comboing, but now it has the flexibility to be the cooler option for comp. You'd still need a painter, but you would have that option.
Yeah.
And then we just nuked it. It's like, what was the point of giving it Fizzy then?
Yeah. I mean, that...
You need a burst bomb at that point.
That's what really contrasts these weapons here compared to the bottom ones, is that these have the enabler type identity, where they're meant to be a core component in a team composition in competitive play, whereas the other ones kind of like... It does feel like they play for themselves. And in a team game, that feels very weird. I mean, someone could argue saying like, well, don't you need both? But... if you're playing for yourself in a team game, that kind of, I don't know, it just throws me off.
Yeah, it's personally. An enabler with few exceptions. Like range has a bit, you know, it's hard to balance range AoE a bit. Bucket hard to balance with strike. Custom Expo doesn't have like the kit to enable other stuff, but it's fun. And then Wellstring has, you know, better kit to enable other stuff, but the AoE is something that's hard to tweak. But it's like, you know, Wellstring has the object damage AoE stuff. Expo has the backline AoE that's, you know, enabling your team a little bit more because not enabling, a little more self-sufficient. Wellstring enables the team a little more. And then Dowser, this kit in theory, like Dowser is like this, it's like a backless weapon where you run it as your anchor and it like fights with your other guns. It does chip damage and then fights with the roll. Yeah. And this kit would work fine with it. It's just the weaker one of the two. It's like a little more interesting because Whale doesn't interrupt your play as much, but the Tri-Strike one, like Burst Bomb adds to that playstyle so much because now you can help your teammates when you're not in line of sight.
Okay.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
It's the sole reason it's higher. Like now you pocket your teammates with the gun and you pocket them with Burst Bomb, but you also can use Burst Bomb for yourself, but then you're using a lot of ink for yourself. And oh, look, dynamic, interesting thought processes occur.
Okay.
And that's the best weapons are. The best weapons are almost all exclusively enablers or have the coolest playstyle imaginable. Okay. Like Bucket Deco. Bucket with casters and cool. Bucket with
it's such a fun weapon.
Zip on Squiffer. I'm like totally butchering that. It's so cool. Dually with Crab. Dually Squelchers in general. Rapid Deco with Jetpack. All of these are like really cool options. S-Blast with the Burst Bomb combos. Stamper and Wiper's existent. And then Reflux is still here. You know, it's not the enabler because no like normal bomb plus missile cooldown, but Reflux still plays in a cool way. It's just more limited comps wise. Reflux is so cool between like its paint flexibility and fighting with its mobility. Brella has the unique shielding stuff. Rapid Pro Decos have very unique comps, just both of them. C Dowser I talked about. H3 is the mid-range cooler option, and you have Sensor. Dynamo, like, you know, ideally paints the map, AoE, and a cooler. Ballpoint talked about, Splasher talked about, and then edits are this kind of, I guess, dynamic. It's like having a midline weapon, but one with a bit of like a fast midline with downtime issues.
Yeah.
For its charge. Really like vague, but it's really cool. All of these just have like, every time I see the weapon, it's interesting not just in terms of what is going to be ran with it, but also with itself. And you'll notice this is the tier where all the kits are healthy, with like very few exceptions. Like Whale on Long Rapid and Missile on Reflux are the only exceptions. Everything else here has a healthy kit completely in this tier.
So before I get into that term of like healthy, because I've used it in other conversations with like me and Chase, for example, when we were talking about certain specials to come back, that some are healthier. I do want to get on this point because I know someone might make this comment. Wellstring is here, but the regular bow is down there. I know for some players, Wellstring is very annoying because of its object damage. And some people would probably classify the kits on these weapons being a little bit weaker compared. I mean, at least compared to the Chump one on his own situation. Why is Wellstring in the strong category, and why is Bow all the way at the bottom?
Well, one, you can balance Stamp and Wave to be strong without breaking their design, so they can go here. But two, Wellstring does not have the one shot at a long range. Even at its maximum range, it can't really reliably one shot.
I see. Okay.
So it only one shots up close. So there's no worry about having the it only has one. It has strong AoE, but it does not have the worry about that one shot. Okay. That's what makes it so much easier to put up here.
Okay.
Compared to Tri-Stringer. Tri-Stringer could even happen. Like I said, I could be wrong about it, but it's like, that's a challenge. This weapon just doesn't have that. And because of that, you can spec into the AoE, and now we have good AoE on this, whereas Tri-Stringers is like, I mean, it's not nothing, but it's not really, it's real AoE in the same way S-Blast has real long-range AoE. Like, right. It's negligible, really.
Okay.
But specials are probably a big topic, I'd assume, yeah? Yeah,
I mean, talking about the specials, because, like, you were mentioning about healthy with the best category, like, moving back up where we were. There's some noticeable trends at the top of these weapons. So, like, Zipcaster is one of them. I mean, we see it on, I'm counting, like, Squiffer, Slosher, Stamper, and I think that's pretty much it. But we also have, like, inkjet weapons. We have Ballpoint. We have Rapid Blaster. I think, yeah, Rapid Blaster. We have the Brella. Those weapons are unique in themselves. Why do you rank those more as healthier compared to the other ones?
Yeah. Also, before that, real quick, I just realized when I listed unhealthy specials in the best tier, there is one more. Tri-Strike on Dowser. I forgot. That was also an exception.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, we have that one.
I'm okay with it mostly because Dowser is so built around going up close to people and trying to pocket mid lines that Tri-Strike weakness actually makes it interesting.
I don't even think it gets it a lot, right? Because like it's paints abysmal.
If it was balanced to be here, it would.
Okay,
and it kind of needs to enable the comms it's in. It still wouldn't, preferably not as much as Jet Squelcher, but like better than it is now.
Right. Okay.
Inkjet and Zipcaster are like these high risk, high reward specials, especially Caster. I think like when you have playmaking specials, there needs to be dynamics for interesting moments. And one great way to make specials feel powerful without them being broken is to have these trade-offs that allow you to end them early. Like, you can shoot down it when someone's zip casting. Like, if you watch Zera Zipcaster in a tournament, you don't know if he's going to kill two people or if he's going to die. And that's awesome. But, counterplay-wise, that's some of the most hype moments. Like, the most hype thing that ever happened in Splatoon 3 was the Isabel Inkjet parry clip. And I know a lot of people naming it are going to know the clip.
Yeah.
And it's due to the fact that the counterplay to Inkjet is so interesting. And it's like, that's what you need. You need specials that are going to create these hype moments. And the cool part is the counterplay options like these allow you to create hype in both ways, because it means a kill from Inkjet will feel way better than a kill from Zuka because there's more options to deal with it. A kill from Zipcaster, the same thing. So because these options exist, not only can the opponents get a hype moment by killing your special, which is huge, obviously, but it also means you feel like you're overcoming more of a weakness when you get the kills with your special. Even though you have this special weapon, it feels like you are overcoming some kind of flaw, and that's awesome. And like Crab is a similar thing for it. It's not as high risk, but it feels more rewarding to kill.
Right.
Headshotting a crab is awesome. Shredding an entire crab and killing it, like you feel like Superman. Like this guy has 500 HP plus his normal HP, and I killed him, and I beat him. And it's like the special was giving you options to do that, but it still feels really cool to do it. And then crab-wise, if you have like a Stamper trying to demolish your crab, and you, despite the extreme mobility disadvantage, manage to swim around them and kill them anyway, it feels great for you because you have this, like, now you feel like you're the one at a disadvantage. I'm this slow special that can barely move against a sword Spider-Manning halfway across the map, and I was still able to read their movement and kill them. It's like, that's what these specials need to be. Some of them can also dual function as entry, which is awesome. But it's like you want these back and forth interactions, especially as a viewer. You don't want to watch the game, see specials go off, and get bored. And that's like Tri-Strike's problem. It's like, oh my god, strikes go up, people clear the choke, and it caps the zone, or it like clears an area. And it's boring.
It feels lackluster.
And then when they kill the Tri-Strike, it's like, oh, well, there was a shark, and then the shark killed the Tri-Strike because the Tri-Strike user couldn't do anything because they didn't have their gun, they can't swim, they can't. There's nothing dynamic. They just either get everything they want or they lose, and there's no in between. These specials have so much in between. And then it helps that they're also high skill expression, you know? Like there's a lot of room to improve. Like Inkjet's hard. So good players with Inkjet feel even more impressive, and that's good. You want people to play a special and feel like it's worth investing their time into them. It doesn't even have to be a good special. Like Stamp isn't that good, but I've seen players make their entire identity into investing into and learning how to get the most out of the special because there's so much interesting depth with it. That's awesome. We need more of this.
It's not like just point click adventure with with Killer Whale,
like,
right?
Some specials have to be more simple, and that's okay. Like you're gonna have like the key with that. Super Chump is the key of that, actually. To be specific, Super Chump is incredibly simple. Like you can literally use it in like half a second, but it's still dynamic from how the players use the chumps. Are you gonna like use their paint? Are you gonna try to wait until they explode? Are you going to try to get yourself body blocked by specific chumps? If you're on the enemy team, are you gonna shoot them down? Are you gonna try to fight away from them?
Yeah.
Like, how do you deal with it? And so that's how you do simple stuff where like in execution, it's easy. You can have a level 1 player use Super Chump and they'll be able to pop it and it will still get guaranteed paint for them. And it's fine. But at the highest level, there's still a lot of depth between how exactly you use this special properly. And then because the launch phase is so simple, it works on almost everything. Imagine if you had a bucket with chumps. Yeah, it'd be weaker than the strike, but you could use them in combat now. If you're fighting with bucket, you can't use your special because you're fighting. So it limits a bit of what you can do. But if you have chumps, you can. You could like bomb shoot, pop chumps in the middle of the fight and get your bomb back and fight with that. And then the chumps would land and you could play off of the damage or use them to body block. Or you could retake and use them the same way you'd use strikes without you being there. And it works just as well.
Okay. So it's like the interaction and the team play that these specials provide in the game in a competitive setting that make them healthier. Because, you know, some people might look at this tier list and you might say like, oh, well, you said Tri-Strikes at the bottom, but it's like there's some that can be healthy depending on the main weapon. And chumps, even though it's a one click and aim and you're done, it still enables you to do something with your team with the special. Kind of like with ballpoint, right? You fight with the inkjet.
It still creates moments where both the special user, those against it, and those with the special all have something new to think about or do. And and the bottom line is like, you know, chumps with dowsers work fine, strikes with dowsers work fine. But if I could replace every strike weapon with chumps, I would do it in a heartbeat. Like, would Dowser be even better with chumps? 100%. Would every Zuka weapon be better with jetpack? Maybe like one exception. Yeah. Would every slider weapon be better with triple splashdown? Yes. If I could run, like, this would be my dream tournament for specials, like, to really test this. If I had a way to, like, we just can't do it because of custom kits, but if I could customize the weapon kits a bit and just replace the unhealthy specials with healthy ones and throw it into a tournament setting, I would love to see how that would play out. But I can't do it right now because it's like, hey, no strikes, can't pick a bunch of weapons. No Zuka, can't pick a bunch of weapons. And, like, you know, maybe I'll try it anyway. I was kind of hoping third kits would help with this concept, but I'd love to see a tournament where it's like, you have Cooler, Jet, Chump, Zipcaster, Hammer, and like those are the only specials. Booyah, Crab, like all the healthy ones. Maybe I'll still run it, you know? Maybe I'll just make it, I'll put $100 in it so people play the tournament.
So these are the weapons that, we talked about most of the specials here that are classified as healthy. It would be negligible of me to miss out on this one particular special we haven't talked about.
Oh shit, what did I forget?
So NZAP, H3, Dynamo, all share, and heavy, I think a regular heavy. So Tacticooler, why is that some, I kind of already figured because, you know, playing this game for almost 2 years now, it kind of feels necessary to have Tacticooler, but tell me your thoughts. Like, why do you think Tacticooler is healthy for Splatoon 3?
I have a scrapped script on this that I'll probably never make into a video. Maybe it will one day. But to get the Cliff Notes version, Splatoon has always had to find an answer to death as a concept, like on a team scale. We've had Bubbler and we've had Armor, and those haven't worked because even adding a little bit of HP breaks how many of the weapons are built. So Cooler's answer is, instead of, okay, we can't prevent people from dying because it creates too many problems, so we're just going to minimize deaths.
Yeah.
Their impact on the game. And because of that, you now have a tool that incentivizes people to walk forward. You now have a tool that makes random deaths, which are going to be more common without stuff like armor. Like, you're going to randomly die to bombs or charger shots or whatever because there's no armor in the game. And you have a way to make those like, hey, they don't lose their impact. They still deserve to get their kill. If the charger sniped you for peeking a corner barely, they still deserve the kill. But you also don't have to wait 10 seconds and come back with and farm your entire next missile to get back in. You get to come back in like 5 seconds. And it's like, that's a good trade-off.
Okay.
And it's also just, with the way the game's maps are laid out and kit issues and weapon stuff to enable it, Cooler is just kind of necessary for fixing a lot of small problems that would have added up over time. That's kind of the big thing, is Cooler has fixed a lot of tiny things that add up to feel annoying, to the point where it feels so weird to play the game without Cooler. Like, I play solo sometimes and I'm like, it's just worse. Like, that's why I want it to be a mechanic at some point, because there are problems with Cooler. Mainly, it's not fun to use. Like, you have more to do than armor, but like, you just throw a stand, pick up the drink. It's like, it would be awesome if it didn't have to be one of your specials, because then, you know, you're not limited to 3-4 Cooler weapons that are good. So there's problems with it, but the amount of things it helps with, it's worth it. It's worth the trade-off.
I've always felt that Cooler was Nintendo's best way of designing a supportive special in Splatoon as a franchise, because playing against Bubbler, it just sucked. Like, person insta framed, pressed it, okay. You can't do anything for those few seconds. And then Ink Armor having that global range, like, at least with Tacticooler, it acts like a beacon to the enemy, where if you want to, you know, take advantage of somebody moving their position to get to Tacticooler, and you could punish that. Whereas with like Ink Armor, you could have the whole team on the right side and then one person all the way on the left. They drop, and then Ink Armor, then they just go in with that additional health.
Yeah, and it feels horrible.
It feels horrible. So I think Tacticooler, as much as some people might think it's, I don't know. I get the feeling some people may not like it, but I've always liked the special since it was first introduced or when we first played it in the demo, and I've liked it since. I think it's
there
a
are valuable
really good
reasons to dislike it. It's fair.
Yeah.
If anything, what I want to see balance-wise, because they can afford to tone back Cooler a little bit, and they might by the time this comes out, I would like it so that the stand itself, not the drinks, the stand either lasts a little bit less long or revert a bit of the grab range buffs a little bit. Okay. Because I think what you need, or what is the biggest issue, is the counterplay. And like, obviously the counterplay isn't too bad because, you know, killing a Cooler player has value and there's inherent trade-offs of having a Cooler. But if you had a bit more of an ability to prevent people from getting Cooler in the first place, that opens up options a lot. That makes it feel a lot more dynamic. So I think that's the part of the special that is the most important to change. Because if it feels like you have more choices to prevent Cooler in the beginning, then it's going to feel like the special has a lot more to do. You could also give it HP, but it's so... The problem with the HP is you would need to make the cooldown separate from it, and balancing it would be hard. I'm not opposed to giving the Cooler stand HP, though. Like, it would have to be a lot. It'd have to be like...
Oh, so it could be shredded like a wave breaker.
15, yeah, so you could break it. Okay. It'd have to be like 1,500 to 2,000, though.
Oh, damn.
Not as much as Bubble, but it'd have to be a lot.
Right,
Like,
okay.
You have to realize like how big sources... Like, Tri-Strike would just be so broken. Yeah, you would also have to make Tri-Strike do less damage to it. Because, like, you could just 3-Strike would nuke the Cooler.
Yeah.
And then Strike would be so broken because you could just insta-nuke every Cooler at the end. So it's like, it's hard. Balancing Cooler is hard. HP is a little risky, but like inherently I like getting rid of invincibility. So maybe there's a way they can do it.
So in your perfect world, and this would be what fits your perfect world of competitive play. There were some interesting comments that I do want to bring up on that post that you made when you posted this tier list. The comment was something like, wouldn't a perfect meta be where all weapons are played equally? And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because I also have my own thoughts on it, but I want to hear yours as well.
Okay, there's a few things. One, it can't happen. Like, it's straight up not possible. You can't do it. It will never happen. But second, like, even if it could, like, as we've talked about for the past almost 2 hours now, there are a multitude of different problems in terms of play styles that you have to think about, in terms of interactions. You don't just want everything to be good, because some things aren't built to be good for competitive play, or some things shouldn't be good because of their effects on the game. And no matter what you do balance-wise, there are some things that are impossible to fix without going to rework territory. And even if you could rework every problem in the game, the idea that you'll not have anything sub-special main weapon that would be a problem for the game is reaching the same levels of impossibility. There are going to be things that have problems, no matter how hard you try. What you have to do is think about what you want to highlight. Splatoon 2 highlighted coordinated play. That's what it wanted to do. It could have done a better job with it, but that was the goal. That was the vision for the game. What I think is best for Splatoon 3 is a few things, or for Splatoon in general, I guess. One, I think the flexibility of weapons is inherently interesting. There's not defined roles, so there's a lot you could open up playstyle-wise. Two, I think that the weapon lends itself to natural coordination without forcing it. So I like the idea of having weapons that can coordinate with each other, but you don't feel like you need to get things done. And three, fight-heavy, fast-paced game. The game moves fast. If you have this unique movement system and fast respawns and quick kill times, use it. That's what the game should be about. That's what you've built. So use that. Have these fast, quick fights. And I think these three things are what centered my list. Right? Like Splash naturally coordinates the things, but it's self-sufficient. It has these dynamic toolkits, but it can also play up. Stuff like Cooler encourages the fast-paced gameplay that I like. The dynamic stuff like that, that's there. And so not everything is going to fit into that vision, and my vision isn't the only vision. I'm sure the devs have their own idea for what they want for the game, and probably have smaller ideas for a whole. I'm sure when they look at a weapon, they have an ideal way that they want the weapon to play and want it to function as, and that's, maybe it's a good vision, maybe it's a bad vision, but that's what you have to go with. If you strive to just balance everything perfectly, you're gonna just be you're running up the endless stairs in Mario 64. You're never gonna finish. There's no way to do it.
It's very hard.
I don't think it's worth, like, obviously, this isn't to say don't make the game more balanced. If you have an option that feels horrible, like, obviously your gap between your worst and best weapon shouldn't be that much, and you should look to shrink that gap. But that can't be your only focus.
Yeah.
There has to be more to it. And then the other thing is, in terms of a perfectly balanced game for who? For A rank? For competitive play? For S+? Because you can't do it for all of them. So who's the perfect game for? What's the perfect balance for? Because that's a whole nother problem. And that's what Clash is at the bottom of the list. Because there is no, because a Clash that is perfectly balanced for competitive play isn't the same as a Clash that's perfect for B rank, and you can't have both. Oh, and none of this is to mention that multiplayer balanced Splatoon is a small part of a giant game. What about all the balanced weapons in Salmon Run? What about them in single player? What about them in Table Turf? Those all require balancing too. There's only so many resources you can dedicate to it. There's so many reasons why this shouldn't be the goal, but it's just the effort spent to get marginally close to that goal will often be better spent going for more achievable ideas. That's what would be my bottom line.
And I think to add on to that, because I also had my own thoughts about when JPEG posted that comment of wouldn't a perfect meta be all weapons are played equally? On a casual level, I could see you could use whatever you want and you could have fun, and if that's your end goal, then all weapons would be equally fun to you. That's completely fine.
You reminded me of something.
Oh, go ahead.
Very quick.
Sure.
I believe it was Sakurai did a did a little bit of a video where he talked about Smash's balance and like I think it was Elite Smash or something, where the difference between the highest performing and worst performing character was like 48 to 52%, somewhere around there. Where it's like, oh, and people were like, "Oh my God, Smash is so well balanced." It's like, for that, it's well balanced, and that's fine.
Yeah,
but that doesn't, at top level though. Sonic runs around the entire map in camps, and you have Steve problems and Min range stuff and Kazuya 0 to deaths, and it's like, you could argue that stuff is balanced, but is it healthy for the game? And I'm not a Smash player, so I'm not going to go any deeper than that. But it's like, that's the thing where you can even have a game like Smash Ultimate with an impossibly large roster that has the general mode of play be as balanced as possible, and they're not living in a perfect utopia, and there's still plenty of balance discussion over there, because that's not even the whole thing you want. So it's like, Smash Ultimate's a good example to me, because as far as I'm aware, that's the closest I've seen, like from public data, of a game possibly get to balance. And it goes to show that, hey, that's one small part of a very large picture when it comes to balancing and designing the game.
It becomes extremely difficult to make all weapons perfectly equal, because like we were just discussing, like throughout this whole thing, I'm pretty sure for people that are listening caught on as well, that once you change one element of a weapon, it could have unintended consequences on others directly or indirectly. If you nerf a weapon, it could potentially nerf, like you were saying, right? With Trizuka getting nerfed from 60 to 53, Wavebreaker indirectly, even though it's not in the patch notes, right? It still indirectly got nerfed. And I think once you start trying to make changes to everything so everything is perfectly equal, you just, like you said, like you're just running upstairs and there's no end timeline.
Especially as each game gets larger and larger, this goal is going to be less and less feasible.
More weapons.
Like, even though each game has an advantage, because hey, Splatoon 3 already went through Splatoon 1 and 2 balance cycle, but now but there's even more stuff in this game. And Splatoon 4 will likely be the same thing until there's some kind of reset. If there is some kind of reset, it's always going to be harder and harder.
Yeah.
It's not an enviable position.
and in competitive play, I mean, you're gonna have winners and losers. That's just, I mean, that's the natural form of any competitive play in any sport, esport or whatever. It doesn't matter. You're gonna have some weapons that people gear towards more because they just perform better. They do better on a competitive level. I mean, like you were saying, Clash Blaster. If anybody in the comment section can tell me how many tournaments Clash Blaster has won, feel free. But I don't know what to tell you, you know?
And that's okay. It doesn't have to be a tournament.
Yeah.
Like, I know I'm a competitive player and I talk about competitive a lot, but I do care about the other parts of the game. I love that Junior is this beginner weapon. I like that about it. It's awesome. It doesn't need to be a competitive weapon. Right. Even though I am a competitive player, I'm not advocating to ruin Junior for beginner players, to give it some cool mechanic to make it fight more and be healthy for the game. Like, no, it's not worth the effort. Let it be for the beginner players. That's who it's supposed to be for. If you want to make it advanced Junior, make a new weapon, or modify Arrow Spray, it's similar enough, and make Arrow the advanced one or something like that. Like, make it something different. You have to think about what weapons are trying to do. It's a lot to think about. Game design and balance is a very complicated topic. There was a lot we talked about here, and there's honestly probably even more that we didn't, but I hope that, I'm not an expert or anything. I'm a player, and I look mostly into one game for the most part, but I've really tried over the past few years to think about this topic a lot more. And, sometimes I get challenged on it. I've changed opinions on things a number of times, and I've learned a lot about it. My original design video was complimenting missiles. It's been, things changed.
People can change, right? Opinions can change, people.
Opinions change. But it's like, I hope that this discussion, for anyone who listened to the end, can help. Like, the main thing I wanted to communicate here is just how complicated this stuff is. How many different things go into it, how many things to account for, and, you got a little bit of a hint of what I would want, what I put together in 30 minutes at least. And that's my ideas from all these different years of forming opinions. But I think just in general, I want more people to learn about game design and just balancing the game in general, because I think there is a lot, like, I see casual players complaining about Fortnite stuff on Twitter. Like, Fortnite is like a big one where I see people complaining about like casual and competitive aspects, and I see those discussions and I think I look at it in a bit more nuanced view just from my perspective, because I've looked at this topic for so long. But I think a lot of people look at game balance and stuff like that and think, oh, it's so easy. Or just don't do this, or just don't ruin the game for casuals, or it's competitive players suck, or oh my god, how are they doing this change? How dare they nerf the Clash Blaster by 0.2% blast radius size? They ruined the game for top level 0.01%. You know, both sides have their oversimplifiers. Right. It's like, realistically, my god, there's so much more to it, and learn about it and understand it if you're interested in it, because this is a topic that has so much, like, I'm talking about it all these years later. This is a topic with so much depth if you think about it. And hey, it's been one way I've kept my interest in Splatoon, even when I haven't enjoyed playing as much, because this game's fun to think about. So if it helps, then, you know, I think it's a nice avenue to think more about the game if you consider or try to learn about how it's designed. So that's it. I've probably taken up too much of your time already, so
you're good.
I mean, for allowing me to ramble.
Yeah, of course, and you're always more than welcome to come back on. For anybody already not familiar with Chara's channel, make sure to subscribe to his channel. And yeah, if you enjoy this type of discussion as well, make sure to subscribe to my channel as well. I do a lot of discussions, or attempting to do more discussions about competitive topics like this. So yeah, Chara, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really been super fun. This was one of my favorite talks to have. Thank you.